He came fully prepared to humiliate her on live television. But by the time Karoline Leavitt was done, the entire studio sat in stunned silence. Karoline Leavitt wasn't new to interviews. She had faced tough questions before, stood her ground in hostile debates, and handled conversations designed to shake her. But this one? Something about it felt different. She had first heard about the interview a week prior, an invitation from a high-profile news program. Not just any program, though. One notorious for its confrontational style. The kind where guests weren't just questioned but cornered. And the host? A seasoned journalist with decades in the industry, well known for belittling younger guests, especially those who didn't align with his worldview. Karoline had done her research. Richard Caldwell was a veteran in the industry, a man who built his career on sharp words and an even sharper tongue. His method was clear: provoke, discredit, and if necessary, humiliate. It was never about conversation, it was about control.
And tonight?
Karoline was his target. She could already hear the criticisms before even stepping foot into the studio. Too young, too inexperienced, too ambitious for her own good. The labels didn't bother her. What did was the arrogance of men like Caldwell, who believed a smirk and a raised eyebrow were enough to rattle her. The moment she arrived, she felt it, the unspoken condescension. The producer, a man in his mid-50s, greeted her with a thin smile that never quite reached his eyes. The assistant, a younger woman, offered a hesitant nod but avoided eye contact. Everything about the atmosphere sent one clear message: she wasn't expected to win this exchange. But Karoline? She wasn't here to play by their expectations. Sitting in the makeup chair, she barely listened as the stylist brushed powder over her face. The murmur of voices from the adjacent set filtered through the walls. She could hear Caldwell's distinct voice wrapping up his current segment, his tone smooth, confident, the voice of a man who had spent years controlling the conversation. The stylist adjusted her blazer collar. "You ready?" Karoline met her own gaze in the mirror. She didn't need to answer. Minutes later, she was led into the studio. The lights were blinding, the air conditioning almost unnaturally cold. Just beyond the cameras, journalists and industry insiders sat in silence, waiting. Caldwell was already in his chair, legs crossed, a practiced smile on his face, the kind not meant to welcome, but to challenge. His fingers drummed lightly against the desk as she took her seat. "Karoline Leavitt," he said, drawing out her name as if tasting it for the first time. "Welcome to the show." She nodded. "Thanks for having me." His eyes flickered, scanning her, assessing just how much resistance she would put up. Leaning forward slightly, his smirk barely concealed, he began. "You've made quite a name for yourself in a short time. Some might say, a little too fast for someone with so little experience." Karoline met his gaze head-on. She had expected this, the veiled insult disguised as an observation, the attempt to plant doubt right from the start. "I think experience comes from action, not just years," she said evenly. Caldwell let out a short chuckle, shaking his head slightly, as if amused. But isn't that what every young upstart says, right before realizing they're in over their head?" There it was, the first attempt to make her second-guess herself. But Karoline didn't blink. And Caldwell? He wasn't finished. Tilting his head, fingers tapping against the desk in mock curiosity, he went further. "I have to ask, do you really believe you've earned a seat at this table? Or is this just another case of someone trying to skip the hard work and go straight for the spotlight?" The air in the studio shifted. This wasn't going to be a conversation. It was going to be a battle. But Karoline? She had never been one to back down from a fight. Caldwell leaned back, fingers steepled, his eyes locked onto her like a predator, sizing up its prey. The tension in the studio thickened. Karoline recognized the tactic. Establish dominance early. Make the guest feel like they're defending themselves from the start. But she wasn't here to play defense. Adjusting her posture, she met his gaze without hesitation. "I don't believe success follows a set timeline," she replied. "If someone is competent, driven, and prepared, why should they have to wait their turn?" Caldwell smirked, shaking his head slightly. "That's the thing about younger generations, always in a rush." She could hear it, the faint chuckle from someone off camera. Probably a producer. They were expecting her to stumble. She didn't. I think the idea of paying dues is often used to keep people in their place, she countered. What exactly are we talking about here? A waiting period? An arbitrary number of years before someone's opinion is valid? Because the world doesn't work that way anymore. Caldwell's smirk twitched. He hadn't expected that. Shifting in his chair, he tried again. That sounds convenient, he said, tone laced with condescension. But let's be real. People don't just wake up one morning and suddenly deserve a platform. It takes time, hard work, and frankly, wisdom that comes with age. Karoline let a brief silence pass, not long enough to be awkward, just enough to let his words settle. Wisdom comes from experience, she said finally. But experience isn't just about age. It's about what you do with the opportunities you have. Some people spend decades in a field and never push beyond the surface. Others? They come in and through sheer work ethic, insight, and innovation, make an impact almost immediately. Caldwell chuckled under his breath. And I assume you put yourself in that second category? She tilted her head slightly. I'll let my work speak for itself. For the briefest moment, Caldwell's expression flickered, just a hint of irritation. She wasn't playing into his game. But he wasn't done yet. He leaned forward, voice lowering slightly. All right then. Let's talk about credibility. The studio was silent. The audience? Hooked. Karoline stayed steady, seeing exactly where he was trying to steer this. Undermine her credibility. Paint her as a product of the digital age, rather than someone who had earned her place. But she didn't flinch. It's funny, she said, a slight smile forming. People in power always say that, right up until the moment someone younger outperforms them. Then suddenly, the conversation isn't about skills, facts, or results. It's about credibility. The goalposts move. Caldwell's smirk hadn't faded, but there was something forced about it now. He knew it. The balance had shifted. And Karoline? She wasn't just holding her ground anymore. She was controlling the conversation.